Data protection and privacy teams are under more pressure than ever with new laws, AI oversight, data breaches, and the constant expectation to do more with fewer resources.
That's why TrustArc built a modern privacy and data protection management platform powered by Arc Intelligence. It unifies your tools, automates the work that slows you down, and surfaces what matters most right when you need it.
From guided quick actions to our intelligent assistant, Ask Arc, you get credible, contextual answers backed by expert research, not generic AI guesses.
Finally, privacy that works the way privacy pros work.
Learn how TrustArc helps teams move faster with confidence at trustarc.com/serious-privacy. That's trustarc.com/serious-privacy.
You're listening to Serious Privacy, powered by TrustArc. Here are your hosts, Paul Breitbart, Ralph O'Brien, and Dr. Kay Royal.
Usually when we talk about credit scoring, we talk about the US, but this time we actually talk about credit scoring in the European Union. Also, we talk about chatbot and politics. We talk about the Dutch DPA's case against the Lawn Tennis Association, more fallout from the Afghan data breach in the UK, Apple being forced to allow rival app stores in the UK. Why wasn't that already happening, I wonder? And some more. Lots of news to cover this week. My name is Paul Breitbart.
My name is Ralph O'Brien, and welcome to Serious Privacy. I get to say it this week. I never get to say it.
You get to say it. Kay has other obligations today, so you'll have to make do with the two of us.
Yeah, no Kay. Paul and I are going to do the best we can in her absence, and it falls to me as well for the unexpected question.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, don't worry, I'm not going to make it too taxing. I'll make this one quite general. Do you consider yourself lucky?
I don't know. Typically, if you look at games of chance, then probably the answer is no, because I've never won a big prize. Generally in life, I would say I can't complain.
I think that's where I am as well. Yeah, I don't exactly play the lottery or anything like that. And I do play lots of games, actually. I do play lots of games, and they always say the house wins and all sort of dice roll towards an average eventually. But so no, I don't consider myself lucky or unlucky in terms of games of chance, but in terms of life, very privileged and grateful for it. Roof over the head, food on the table. I consider myself a glass half full person. Every cloud has a silver lining.
Oh, I would say that the glass is half empty because then a new one is coming along soon.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, if the glass is half empty, it's time for someone else to buy a round, right?
Exactly. How's your week been, Ralph?
My week, very busy. I've been doing a lot of training. I've been doing a lot of IAPP training with a CIPE and a CIPM. But actually, it was my weekend. I actually painted one of my spare rooms this weekend. And along with painting, I managed to do a load of training and pass the Euro privacy exam. So for those people that don't know, there's under Article 42 of the GDPR, organizations can obtain certifications against not the entire organization like an ISO, but against a sort of a smaller target of evaluation, a processing activity or an app business unit, in fact. And I've been approached by a couple of companies who want me to act as a certification auditor. So what that means is, rather than doing the consultancy side of things, it's going back to my audit background as I used to do with British Standards to see whether they get the badge on the wall. And so that involves looking at their target of evaluation against the Europris criteria, which is inherited from the GDPR and approved through the national regulators. Yeah, accredited certification exists, and I think it should have its place in the sort of the scheme of how to prove that you are doing your best to comply with data protection laws. And I do believe badges have got a place in supply chain assurance. Mm-hmm. So for me, I'm really grateful that I've got the opportunity and should be doing my first audits to the standard in November.
Well done. That's exciting. And indeed, certification, I agree, certifications play a big role in GDPR. And we talked about that before. Codes of conduct, mainly for the business-to-business relationships, and certifications for the business-to-consumer relationship, to give that extra layer of confidence that your data is in good hands. Yeah, if you want to know more about that, just reach out to Ralph directly. Sure, he wouldn't mind the extra work in 2026 to hand out some more badges on the wall.
Yeah, badges on the walls. Thank you, Paul. Very much appreciate it. And your week?
My week started on Monday with a CIPL event. They had their European summit this year in Amsterdam, so I could easily join the first day of the event. Obviously, Chatham has rules, so I can't say what Bojana actually said or what everybody else actually said. There were a few core topics that came across. First of all, in one of the keynotes, very clear that we should also start looking more at the free flow of personal data and not just at the acquired levels of data protection, as is made very clear also in the recitals and the first provisions of GDPR. It is also about the free flow of personal data, as we've been telling you on the podcast also for many years, also in light of international data flows. The other thing that I think almost everybody in the room agreed with, and maybe not surprising given CIPL's membership, but was that the current digital legislative space has become so crowded with legislation that has been rather rushed through and shows inconsistencies and divergences where they overlap, that it's really hard for companies to comply, especially for smaller ones, but even for the bigger ones, it makes it a challenge. When asked what is the one thing we should avoid, I think half of the room agree that would be the EU Digital Fairness Act that the Commission is currently considering. Let's first implement what we've got, make sure that we have proper guidance, proper compliance with those before we start piling on new laws that will cause further divergence. And I think that's an important call out. I tend to agree with that as well, looking just at how smaller companies are struggling with the legislative landscape and the regulatory landscape at the moment. Not saying there shouldn't be room for new legislation at all, but we've just adopted all of these digital single market instruments. So let's first get those done and dusted and properly implemented before we start considering new legislation.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. I agree. There's an awful lot on for an organization to have to deal with. By the time you add in the EU's AI Act and the
Data
DSA,
Act, the Data Governance Act, the DMA, the DSA.
Exactly, yeah. There was that whole slate of legislation that seems to have been dropped really quickly. And so, yeah, to maintain internal compatibility within it, I find fascinating. We were only talking last week that about the Dutch judgment under the DSA, which about having an algorithm that, or a feed free from algorithms, which then dovetails directly into the pay or okay argument. We've seen competition law use data protection law as well. And it's fair to say that organizations have got to deal with a lot of regulation and legislation already. And obviously I speak here from the UK as well, which has diverged from Europe. And so we've got our differing data protection regime as well. In fact, one more thing that I'll add to that is, there's a bit of news this week, is, as I understand it, the European Data Protection Board has brought out its opinion on UK adequacy in light of the Data Use and Access Act that's been passed. I think it's fair to say they weren't objecting to UK adequacy, but they were certainly critical of a lot of areas which they said they should really keep an eye on. I think these are areas that I too have echoed as a sort of an area of concern. Anu Tallis, the EDPB chair, has said that the EDP welcomes the continuing alignment between UK and Europe's data protection framework, despite the recent changes in the UK, but she calls upon the European Commission to address her points and making sure that the UK is effectively monitored once an adequacy decision is adopted. And I think the key elements, and I definitely agree within here, is there's a lot in there that allows the Secretary of State for DCIT, for the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology, to pass extra amendments without parliamentary scrutiny. And I think that's the biggest one. All the way through the law, it says the Secretary of State can do something different. The Secretary of State can say that things are special category data or not special category data, can exempt automated decisions or not exempt automated decisions, can improve new countries for international transfer, can add or remove to the list of recognized legitimate interests or compatible secondary purposes. there's a lot of power to take away from Parliament and give to a politician, essentially. So I would definitely echo Anu Tallis's and the EDPB's point there.
Mm-hmm.
There was another point about technical capability notices, which would require companies to circumvent encryption, as we've seen with Apple. We'll talk about that later. And of course, the changes to the structure of the ICO to the Information Commission, whether they're going to still be transparent and independent, and the availability of analytical data around their corrective and enforcement activities. Yeah, no barrier to adequacy that I've seen by December, but certainly hedging their bets by saying these are the things in the Data Use and Access Act we need to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and that will probably also give cause for further discussions in 2026, maybe also together with the ICO, with the new chair of the Information Commission, to see how the partnership between the EDPB and the ICO will continue in years to come.
Yeah, I agree. It is a partnership. The ICO no longer attends the EDPB. Obviously, they are not an EU supervisory body anymore, and they can go their own way. We noted last week the divergence between the ICO, who is essentially now almost recommending PayerOK. I got an email from the ICO last week saying, hey, here's PayerOK, and here's some guidance about it, and here's how to use it. Whereas we've said that the findings on the continent are heading in
a
the
different
other way.
direction. Yeah, that's for sure. Other news out of the EDPB from their monthly meeting is that for 2026, they will actually have transparency as their key topic for the various sweeps. So that means that there will be questionnaires being sent out by the national data protection authorities in order to find out how companies, how organizations are dealing with their transparency requirements under Article 13 and 14. Probably we will see some further guidance and recommendations on that topic at the end of 2026, when that whole exercise across Europe is completed. When we are on the topic of transparency, I would like to point you to a fine that was imposed by the Dutch Data Protection Authority, a fine of 2.7 million euro in appeal to Experian Netherlands. And for those of you who don't know Experian, they are a data broker also having a line of business doing credit ratings. And credit ratings in Europe are not as ubiquitous, I would say, as in the US, and certainly not as accessible as in the US. But many jurisdictions do have credit rating agencies, for example, to help you or to assess you when you apply for a loan or a mortgage. In the Netherlands, we have a central agency that typically would keep your credit score. It's not completely a government entity, but it's semi-government, I would say. It's being used by almost everybody. But still, also Experian Netherlands was doing credit ratings for certain companies, for example, for loans or pay in terms, those kind of situations. And the Dutch DPA for a long time has been looking at Experian and other data brokers to see whether what they were doing was within the boundaries of the legislation. It was not. And the Dutch DPA found Experian in breach of GDPR for multiple reasons. First of all, they relied upon a legitimate interest, but could not show the necessity of all the data elements that they were collecting. They were insufficiently transparent. They're the link to the EDPB plans for next year. Insufficiently transparent because they were not telling people that they were building a profile about them. And then also, they didn't let people correct the data if a negative credit score was the outcome based on erroneous data. So 3 clear breaches of GDPR. Already some time ago, Experian was informed about the decision, telling them that, hey, this was actually an issue. It should be improved. A sanction was imposed. We don't know what the original sanction was at this time, but it was imposed on the 6th of December 2023 already. And now in October, the Dutch DPA has decided in appeal that Experian should pay a 2.7 million euro fine. However, that's not the only thing that happened, because Experian said, following this whole process and this whole investigation, actually, this means that our business model is no longer viable in the Netherlands. So Experian Netherlands ceased to operate on the 1st of January 2025 as a direct consequence of this DPA investigation. I'm very much wondering what that means for the rest of Europe and whether other data protection authorities will follow suit, whether other countries will put Experian or other credit rating agencies out of business if they have similar practices. But there you have it, 2.7 million euros and a company out of business because of non-compliance of their business model with GDPR.
Company out of business is worrisome, isn't it? Actually, one of the things I've always said that regulators don't perhaps utilize enough is their temporary or definitive ban on processing power.
Mm-hmm.
Where they
Agreed.
can literally say, stop processing personal data, which is effectively the end for a business. Imagine they'd only ever do it in limited purposes, don't market or something like that. But yeah, obviously we don't want to see businesses go out of business. We'd rather see them comply with the law. But at the same time, if you're doing naughty practices and hurting people.
Exactly. If your business model is against the law, then I think you should be put out of business, to be honest. Just like we don't let companies in business who continue to spoil the environment or to continue to defraud the tax authorities. So I think Experian took a wise decision by concluding that their business model was not sustainable. But it is a breakthrough case because there's not been a lot of cases against credit rating agencies.
No.
I think this is a very good milestone. I'm a little disappointed that the case has not yet, at least, been translated into English. I'm hoping that they will do that at some point because it's relevant for other data protection authorities to see.
Well, large organizations and data brokers do need to be held to account. Talking of holding them to account and wise decisions, there's a really interesting fine issued by the Information Commissioner's Office on Capita. Now, it was to do with a data breach back in 2023 that saw hackers steal millions of information, 6.6 million people, pension records, staff records, details of customers from organizations that Capita then supports, including criminal records, financial data, special category data. So including information on 600 organizations, pension schemes, huge amount of information lost. Now, what's really interesting is they initially informed Capita that they were going to fine it 45 million. Capita then submitted representations of mitigating factors to the ICO, including the fact that they wouldn't appeal. So it's gone from 45 million to, drumroll, 14 million.
That's quite a discount.
Yeah, 14 million as a voluntary settlement if Capita acknowledges the decision, admits liability, and agrees to pay the final penalty of 14 million without appealing. So that is a hell of a discount, isn't it? That's 31 million discount for not saying you're going to fight it.
Well, so that's about 2/3. At the same time, it's 14 million in the bank instead of 45 million, maybe not even awarded by the courts.
Yeah. So the ICO has been under scrutiny this week. The ICO himself, John Edwards, he has been called to Parliament, to the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology Committee in Westminster, where a load of MPs tried to hold him to account for his actions surrounding the Afghan data breach. Now, people will remember us talking about this a while ago, but it's perhaps one of the worst breaches we've ever had, because not only did it include information on Afghan people who were helping the British government whilst during the interim government, but when they left and the data was breached, it potentially leaves those individuals a life-threatening situation.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, because of the breach, quite a lot of people had to be exfiltrated into the UK to protect them from the Afghan forces, from the Taliban, I should say. The leak was difficult, and we talked about it beforehand, including the Commissioner's decision not to impose financial penalties because he was confident that the Ministry of Defence was taking corrective action and wasn't going to do it again. Now, I think this is interesting because when you compare it to a previous breach that I'm thinking about, when Richard Thomas was the Commissioner, the MOD ended up commissioning a huge review of its data practices with an investigation by Sir Edward Burton, prompted actually by a much smaller incident. So it's really interesting to look at this commissioner's approach, and certainly the MPs didn't like it. Basically, one of the MPs, and this is a quote that got into the Telegraph. I actually watched it live, but it was a quote that got into the Telegraph. One of the MPs said, "The Afghan data breach, as far as he was concerned, was dealt with by a few unrecorded meetings and a handshake," which is an interesting thing to say.
It's a terrible thing to say if that is anywhere close to the truth.
Yeah, the commissioner was asked to bring forward records of their enforcement process, their records of how they went about enforcing and records of the audit and that they went through. And basically the commissioner said, we didn't keep a lot of records. Why did we not keep a lot of records? There was a national security interest, and therefore we didn't write a lot down. And we decided to have a couple of meetings with the Ministry of Defence. And in those meetings, they satisfied us they were doing the right things. And so when asked for records and documents to support their decision-making process, the ICO basically said, we didn't keep a lot. And I think that was their real concern. Their real concern was the lack of record keeping and the lack of justification of their approach in formal documented records and processes.
Because I would assume that also in the UK, arm's length organizations like the ICO are bound by archiving requirements at national level.
Yes, FOI law, Freedom of Information law, applies to the ICO itself.
Yeah, of which they are the supervisor.
Yes, which always amuses me when that goes to the upper tribunal when the ICO has found an exemption for itself. Here they'd claim national security, I'm sure, as an exemption, but what was basically said to the MPs was the records weren't even kept in the first place.
And that's the thing. Sure, you can, in my view, I don't know all the nitty-gritty details of UK law, so don't get me there, but in general, I would assume that even if it is a national security issue, that you would keep records, but that those records would be classified and not just accessible to anybody, but still that they would be available to a parliamentary investigatory committee.
Exactly, yeah. I would agree. But yeah, so the parliamentary committee was frustrated that really all they had to go on was John Edwards' word for these meetings took place and he was satisfied with their approach. And there didn't seem to be a formal process or record keeping to back up his decision-making process.
Wow.
So he saw some heat. I think that's fair enough to say. One other little thing that came out of that, just as a side note, that a revelation that came out of that was a notice of intent to serve a fine on Reddit as well. The ICO had made public a notice of intent on Imgur for children and age verification measures.
Yeah, it's an image storage service.
Exactly. And apparently the ICO is doing something similar to Reddit as well for age verification and putting children at risk on the internet, allowing children to access certain areas. So a notice of intent was issued to fine Reddit on the 8th of July, 2025, but the commissioner said they're not going to comment as to how much that is or what it's for even, apart from children in general, because the investigation continues and they've got an amount of time to give representations before a final settlement is made.
Speaking about final settlements, we also have a final settlement in the case of the Dutch DPA versus the Dutch Lawn Tennis Association, also known as the legitimate interest case.
That's been running for ages.
It's been running for ages. You recall the decision of the Court of Justice of the European Union in 2024, stating that the Dutch Data Protection Authority, in their original decision in 2019, fining the Lawn Tennis Association 525,000 euros, was too strict in their interpretation of legitimate interest, and that a legitimate interest could also include a clear commercial interest, which the Dutch DPA denied upfront. So the court says, no, a commercial interest can be a legitimate interest, but we don't know for sure whether there could be still another issue with the legitimate interest legal basis here in this specific situation. The Lawn Tennis Association sharing data of their members with a lottery and a tennis shop, which a lot of members of the tennis association didn't like. But because the Dutch DPA had said legitimate interest, there is no legitimate interest because it's strictly commercial. They never looked at the proportionality and also never did the balancing test. So that was for the lower courts to look into again, according to the Court of Justice of the European Union. We don't get a ruling because the Dutch DPA and the Tennis Association, they settled. The Tennis Association acknowledges that they've made a mistake, that they shouldn't have shared the personal data of their members the way they have. The Dutch DPA acknowledges that they've been too strict and that they've made a mistake. And they have decided to lower the fine from 525,000 euros to 250,000 euros. But that will be further reduced because the Tennis Association has agreed to start together with the Dutch DPA an awareness-raising campaign about privacy to all the tennis clubs, to other sports associations in the Netherlands. So they will work together, and the costs of that campaign can be deducted from the 250,000 euro fine. So I think it's a very nice outcome. This needs to be done by June 2026, and then the final fine amount will be confirmed. But indeed, I like it. Both parties admitting that they were wrong, or at least not completely right, and that they will partner to further raise awareness to avoid other sports associations and tennis clubs making the same mistake.
It's like community service in a way, isn't it? It's saying, instead of giving us the fine, use it to publicize data protection and increase compliance in your sector.
And for a DPA that always says we do not have sufficient resources, that's actually very helpful. And otherwise, the money wouldn't have ended up with the DPA, but just in the big bucket of the government budget. So I think it's a very clever solution.
I wonder whose idea that was. They should get a pat on the back. I think because that's not really, when you look at the GDPR, yes, the power to lodge an administrative fine is there. Yes, the power to do enforcement is there and order corrections is there. But there's nothing to say, use that money to run a public campaign or something like that. So I think whoever came up with that deserves sort of a pat on the back and 2 gold stars.
I agree. I've been very critical of the Dutch DPA in recent years, and we've seen earlier this year the evaluation of the supervisory authority as well, which was quite negative. But they seem to have heard the outcome of the evaluation report, because I see a lot of change and different kinds of approaches, more publicity, more awareness raising, a more positive mindset since that report was issued. So let's hope they will continue in that same direction. Maybe one more thing on the Dutch DPA. Next week, actually the day this podcast will come out, the Netherlands will go to the poll because our government collapsed twice earlier this year. So we need a new Houses of Parliament, a lower house at least. 29 October, election day, and a lot of people have no idea yet what they're going to vote. We have guidance instruments like an electoral compass and an advisory for which party fits your opinions. So you can go through a questionnaire and select agree, disagree, or on a scale. And then based on the answers that all the parties provided to these instruments, you can get an overview of these parties are closest to your own convictions. But we also see that a lot of people are now using AI chatbots like ChatGPT to get electoral advice. And the Dutch DPA conducted a quick investigation, testing these bots, asking the same question over and over again, of course, in different instances to see what output they would give. And in 56% of the tests, only 2 parties, the ones who are the largest in the polls currently, are part of the recommendation. One chatbot is even 80%, and a lot of other parties are recommended less, and some of them are even not recommended at all. So they put out a warning yesterday, just over a week before the elections, that chatbots are not suitable to give electoral advice.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because when you think about how AI works, it looks at existing material on the internet and pulls from it. Now, if previously the 2 main parties have been dominating the news and the 2 main parties have been dominating the news coverage, that's what it's going to talk about. It's going to pull the stuff that it finds and regurgitate it rather than looking for new information that's coming out. And actually, politics has never been so swingy. Looking at the way politics has been throughout the 20th and even into the 21st century, we've had in the UK a swing between Conservative and Labour, and we're still seeing that, with occasionally the Liberal Democrat Party coming into, or the Liberals coming into be the kingmaker if it's a tie almost. But that's broken down. I was looking at the news over the weekend, and the Green Party now in the UK has got more members than the Conservative Party, not in terms of elected representatives, but in terms of sort of party members, which is almost unheard of. There were the Greens have historically only ever got 1 or 2 seats in 1 or 2 constituencies.
But still, in the UK, you only have a handful of parties in Parliament. You maybe 7 or 8 right now with the regional parties.
Yeah, and actually, I would say the bottom 4 of that 7 or 8 are, a couple of seats each.
But in the Netherlands next week, there were 27 parties contesting the elections, of which about 15 stand a chance to win seats in Parliament. And we only have 150 seats.
Nice choice.
C'est l'embarras du choix. And then by the look of the polls, we have 4, maybe 5 relatively large parties, which means that they get over 20 seats. And the rest of them will stick around 5 or lower. So also getting a majority in Parliament for the next government coalition will be pretty challenging.
I've got 2 more bits of news, very quick ones. One you mentioned in the intro, Competition and Markets Authority here in the UK has had a go at Apple and Google, said that they are dominating the smartphone market, and the fact that you can only get apps through the Google Play Store or the Apple Store puts them in a sort of an unfair position of domination. So who knows, perhaps we will see rival app stores being available through the Apple App Store. That's an interesting kind of thing to talk about.
That is something that was, of course, also part of the Digital Services and Digital Markets Act here in the European Union. So I guess it makes sense for the UK to follow suit here and to basically ask both companies to enable for the UK what is already practiced in the European Union. You could even consider that it would have made sense for the UK to stay in the European Union if they're going to follow European legislation. But hey.
There we go. Yeah, so we've got a very livid Google and a very livid Apple, both saying that this isn't right.
The security and...
Yeah, exactly. They face fierce competition and they try and create the best products, services and user experience and shouldn't be forced to provide a fragmented, less seamless experience. So that's an interesting point. The only other point that I want to make before we close today, apart from talking about where we're going to be over the next month, is, again, slightly data protection adjacent. The Jaguar Land Rover cyber attack apparently is the costliest attack in UK history, says experts. 2.1 billion halted the car giant's production on the 1st of September for 5 weeks and caused widespread delays all the way across Jaguar Land Rover's supply chain. 5,000 businesses been affected in total, 1,000 of which have already collapsed. They've classified it as what they call a Category 3 event, and Category 5 event is Goodbye UK. So 2.1 billion from a security and cyber attack point of view is a hell of a loss to take as an organisation, really.
Absolutely.
So, just something to mention. So the final thing I guess we should say before we go is we're going travelling, aren't we?
We are.
We'll be around the place over the next month. So I think there'll be 2 more weeks of podcast as usual, with Kay interviewing a number of people over the next couple of weeks. And then the Picasso Awards.
Yes. I'll make a quick stop in Jersey afterwards, and then we reconvene in Woodland Grange, Lamington Spa for Privacy Space.
A live recording. I'm so looking forward to the live recording.
This is your first, right?
Yeah, I didn't do Nordic Privacy Arena with you, did I?
It's going to be fun.
It's going to be fun. So we will report from Privacy Space. And of course, then the following week, I'll be reporting from IAPP Europe as well.
Absolutely. So yeah, come say hi if you are either at Privacy Space or in Brussels for IAPP. I think there will be some drinks or some people meeting for drinks in Brussels. So reach out to Ralph for that as well if you want to join. I fear that I won't be able to make it, but if everything goes well at the very last minute, I may still jump on a train and join for the drinks. We'll see about that. It will be very last minute if I do. But I know from 2 years ago that we had a blast in doing that, and also meeting some of the podcast listeners, having a very nice evening with good privacy discussions as well.
Thank you, Paul.
That was serious privacy.
This wraps up our podcast for this week. Please do share the episode with your friends and colleagues because we love to get more listeners. And join the conversation on LinkedIn or on Blue Sky. You'll find us under Serious Privacy on both platforms. You'll find Kay as Heart of Privacy, Ralph as IGR O'Brien, and myself as Europol B. Until next week, goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye, y'all.
If you're a data protection or privacy professional, you already know the pressure. Non-stop regulatory change, AI oversight, internal demands, and the expectation to somehow stay ahead of it all. And the old patchwork of tools just isn't cutting it anymore.
No, that's why TrustArc created a modern privacy management platform powered by Arc Intelligence. The TrustArc platform brings your workflows, evidence, research, tasks, and applications all together in one unified and intelligent workspace so you don't waste time digging, clicking, or context switching.
With Ask Arc, your privacy assistant, you can ask plain language questions about laws, jurisdictions, or even your own program data and get credible, cited answers based on Nimity research and more than 1,000 global laws. It's explainable, transparent, and purpose-built for data protection and privacy.
So if you need to add a vendor, create a cookie banner, or start an assessment, quick actions take formally complex tasks, turn them into bite-sized guided workflows to save you time.
It's a platform that thinks like you, works like you, and helps you move faster with confidence, whether you're a seasoned DPO or you're just getting started.
See how modern privacy gets done. Explore Arc at trustarc.com/serious-privacy. That's trustarc.com/serious-privacy.